come in and be installed as part of the construction. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
is there also an antenna set up with that building for the radio systems? Or will they rely on off-site?
Yes, sir. There will be an antenna on site as part of the construction.
Part of what we're going through right now is ensuring that we have the fiber service to that building, and then that we also have redundancies for that particular service, since that's so important to us right now, of course, in our computer-driven world. I want to thank WUR Architects. I mean, they're of course using literature from their end, and they've thought a lot about that. And of course, Director Luther's been heavily involved in trying to make sure that this is a facility that's designed for his needs and Washington County's needs, essentially. I'd like to. I absolutely see this as a regional asset, and we saw that with Benton County over the Memorial Day weekend. What I'm saying is, I think our counties in the surrounding area, we definitely want to open this asset up to them, let them know it exists, let them get familiar with it, in case something were to happen where they're at. If this is a convenient place for them to meet and coordinate, then it'll absolutely be open to them. But I take a lot of pride in that. There's something else I want to mention that the hard part about it are the economics. I think if you remember when we set out on this project, we're about $2.5 million underfunded on this project. That I think we all discussed that if worse came to worse and somebody's holding a gun to our head, we would take out of our savings account. I think that's still I think this is a very justifiable expense. What I will say is we do continue to see grant opportunities essentially that will be what we were trying to cover was like the FF&E and the technology within the building. That's, of course, very expensive in this building due to the needs and the redundancies and things like that. I'll share with you that we were very optimistic that we had this closed with Congressman Womack's office and the community project funding. I don't know if you've ever heard that. That's essentially the old pork barrel spending. It's lipstick on the pig. They've rebranded it. Now it's community project funding. The frustrating part about that is, for me, I was not interested in pursuing that avenue. I don't believe in that necessarily as a spending mechanism of the federal government, but we were told that there are funds specifically for emergency operations centers set aside by the federal government that we cannot access through no other source than that community project funding. And so we were very disappointed to learn that we were not selected by Congressman Womack's office to be put up for that funding in Congress. Of course, I'm very disappointed in that. I can't help but believe there was a misunderstanding of sorts after what Benton County just went through this year and what we're faced with. You know, one of the things I was telling the news agencies today is your mind could run away with itself on the issues that we might run across, not just natural disasters, but maybe man-made disasters of some kind. One of the things that really this time of year falls on me is that we host about 70,000 people on any other given Saturday here in Washington County, and so I think this is us finally stepping up to our responsibilities as a county to fulfill what we need. And also, you know, I want to very much support our growing municipalities in this county. And once again, this is an area of government that we are responsible for, emergency response. I want to make sure we're doing everything we can on our end too to uphold our responsibilities there with those cities. I think we remember a couple years ago the tornado went through Springdale. This would have been an asset that would have been immensely beneficial at that point in time just to coordinate response once again. So we are, I want to thank you guys for all the hard work you're doing. I also want to thank C.R. Crawford. They're our construction managers on this group. When we interviewed them and they started on this project, they wanted it and they said we're scrappy. And I think that's true. I think they've gotten us I think they've helped WER. I hope you guys can attest to that, to say that I think we've gotten a lot of bang for our buck per se in this building. That you can understand we were really hard on them to try to get a lot of good use out of this square footage. And so, guys, we're ready to break ground. I think they're going to have a construction meeting Friday, and we're about ready to turn dirt down there on the South Campus on this. And so this is a major step in the right direction for Washington County, and I hope it's a major asset that we can be proud of for not only us once again, but for the region. Any other questions? They'll have those. We have them. If that video is quite large, but we have stills. If you guys want those, we've released that to the media, and so we'll try to maybe send the stills out to you guys via email, so you'll have those. Like I said, the video is quite large, but if you wanted that too, we'll get you a jump drive with that 3D rendering in it and get the videos in there.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Good job. I'll buy you pizza.
All right. Moving on. item number 7 was postponed until the Finance and Budget Committee, so we'll move into number 8. All right. I want to share with you guys that I was really disappointed by our last quorum court meeting and when we went over the planning ordinance. And here's a couple things I want to share with you guys. There were some comments made, and I think every now and then people think they're making a political slight towards me. And I'm fine with that from the public. And the thing that I think there's some misunderstandings there about any given ordinance. It bothers me when the JPs do that. And what I want you guys to understand is I accept the personal attacks, but please remember that I have staff behind me that's doing a lot of this work, and they take it very much to heart when they hear they did not feel appreciated last meeting, and I'll share that with you guys about the work that they've done on this planning ordinance to this point, and I will also share with you the work that they do in general. They feel that you guys are very dismissive of the work that they do as a planning department, and that you're pretty dismissive about the work that the planning board does, and I'm just sharing with you their hearts because I want this to continue to be a process that we can work towards and get something really good for Washington County. And so here's my deal coming in here tonight. Because it disappointed me that we'd kind of lost track of where we were at, I felt like. We'd lost all of our context last meeting. Here's the deal. Our current zoning, the cut process as it stands now, we don't think's legal. We've really put Brian and the legal team out on a limb here to defend these in court when they come up. And so for the public and whoever's at, there was a lot of questions last meeting about how did we ever get down this path? Should we do this at all? And I felt the impetus of all this is that it's not legal, what we're doing. We do not find it legally defensible. And it's for 2 reasons. We know that what we're doing is spot zoning. There's no question about that. People laugh behind our backs at that, and they wonder how we get away with it. The second thing is, and I think this got to there were some comments thrown around last meeting about, well, the judge is trying to take all the power. The judge is trying to own this process. For as much as you'll hear me and hear my heart, 2 things. There's nobody in their right mind that would own more of this process. There's not. And the other thing I think I hear about, the other main reason why what we're doing is illegal is that you guys are hearing the whole project presented to you. And I know you really appreciate that power. But the issue is then you become very much risking arbitrary and capricious. And I know we throw those terminologies around, but that's a big deal. And we do not see these cases as defendable anymore. And so we're really worried about that. That's why we pressed this issue. That's why we brought it to you. This is a very difficult issue. I'm sure you guys feel it as much as anybody. It's very difficult to put together. But what I want you guys to understand is when I started this, I told the planning and legal teams who had already been working on this for a number of months before I got in office, I said, let's make this legal and let's make this fair. And the ordinance that's in front of you is our best effort at that. No other motivation behind it than that. Keep in mind that the accusation that I wanted to control this and it was a power grab by the judge, that means I would have told legal and planning to do something that their consciences wouldn't let them do, and they would sit here and present that to you tonight. So let's just keep that in mind. I want to also say you guys have more power underneath the current planning law than anybody else in this state. And I think that is also indicative of why you're not supposed to have it. And so what might have been good 20 years ago, planning and zoning through the municipalities has developed a lot since then. Everything's moving in that direction. And so we look at this is a process that the quorum court owns. We are serving you to bring you this best draft, essentially, is what we've done. We're not here trying to dictate this or tell you guys what to do. We're here to give you our best possible effort at making it legal and making it fair. And I just want to go back. This is not, the legal landscape we face now with our current ordinance is not defensible. And so when we first started this process, I hope you guys understand, we were asking, well, is it the pleasure of the court to not have any planning and zoning? We'll just repeal all of it. I think the collective was that we were not prepared for that. But Councilor Lester has a draft ordinance tonight that we're going to pass out so you guys can look at that. If that's the way we would like to go, of course, that's the easiest and simplest way to have no planning or zoning. But alas, this is why we were here, and this is why the ordinance we presented to you guys was the understanding that we wanted to move to something more open and transparent and fair, and that's what our process was. I also want to talk about the map. Last meeting, the map came up as the big issue. We thought maybe that's where we should move and carve on a little bit, so we have some different sample maps to show you guys tonight about different things. I also want to comment again on where the map we showed came from. We were trying to make that an objective process. So we were not looking at the map when we sat down and brought up that criteria. We basically said what would bring in, what would be a good start. And on the front end, you understand that has to be objective. You have to set out that criteria in an objective manner without knowing the result. So we said, let's put it on major thoroughfares and state highways. That's the map you guys were presented. So what I want you to understand is we set that criteria out before we looked at the map. I will caution you now, though. You guys can, by listening to the whole project in planning, like the cut process we have now, you run the risk of being arbitrary and capricious about why you denied that, right? You're going to run into the kind of the same thing if you move into that map and you're picking particular spots and you're wanting to either zone those or not. There should be criteria on the front end that develop that map that really help us not to be arbitrary and capricious. So I want to use as an example, last meeting we got caught up in the concept of runoff and flooding. Okay. We as a planning team are telling you guys that we rely on outside engineers and staff reports. This is the staff report for the preliminary approval of a new subdivision. It's all the engineering. We rely on outside engineers to do this. We do not have the expertise for that in the county. And so, just to use that runoff as an example, we're telling you we don't have inside engineering and knowledge enough on the front end to tell you these parcels aren't subject to rezoning. If you guys choose to do that, you need to give us a legal reason why you would amend that map and you're taking parcels off or you're taking parcels on. Because you understand that's going to be the first thing that pops up in the court of law is the reasons behind why you're doing that. And counselor's here to try to help you craft that so that we're not being arbitrary and capricious. But now we're here. I want you guys. So tonight, I'm here all night if we need to be. Let's get to that zoning section and let's go through it line by line and make sure we don't have any questions. And then let's work on the map if that's what you guys are ready for. I'd like to show you these different maps. Justice Rios Stafford the other day brought up the idea, we continue to hear this concept of having nodes at the intersections of highways. That's something you guys should maybe consider. We have a map that shows nodes that we've put together that's very rudimentary at this point, but I would like to gain consensus as much as we can tonight that the ordinance is where we can understand it and that we can start carving on it, and then we would like to get some general conception of where the map is from you guys of what we would like to move towards. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I would, Director Addis here, where would we like to start? Would you like to pull up the ordinance first and roll through that? Justice Coger?
Thank you very much, Judge. I appreciate that. I'd just like to mention that I do respect the staff and what they've done. I know they've worked hard on this, but I also want to address, constituents have reached out to me when you talk about, you were saying that the county judge is taking over. The administrative officers designated by the county judge, the county engineer designated by the county judge, the Washington County Planning Board appointed by the county judge, subject to quorum court approval. The county road superintendent designated by the county judge, the county surveyor designated by the county judge, zoning official designated by the county judge, the zoning board of adjustment appointed by the county judge, subject to court approval. The planning board and the zoning board of adjustment must submit their budget request to the county judge for approval. All street and road extensions shall meet design standards unless approved by the county judge. Decisions of the planning board are appealable to the county judge. Decisions of road superintendent appealable to the county judge. So that's where we're getting a lot of feedback that we're
And what I'm saying is,
No, I was still speaking.
that's no different than whatever a lot of the other laws are.
I was
It's
speaking.
because we're the executive.
I was speaking.
And I was just responding. Go ahead.
Well, let me finish speaking
ahead.
and then respond. So,
Did you speak out of turn? Did you speak up? Right there on the front row, you. Uh-huh. Did you interrupt us? I didn't say a word. Pay attention. Okay. You want to continue?
I'd like to, if I knew, and I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I think that we are giving up a legislative power if we pass this ordinance as it's written. And I'm not even sure we're looking at the correct ordinance, because the ordinance that was sent to me in the agenda packet was, still had the quorum court doing things that we've heard from Mr. Atta and Mr. Lester that we won't be doing. So I don't even know if we've got the right ordinance. But I think there's valid concern about us passing legislative power to the county judge, and we should never do that.
Let's go through it.
That's
Director
granted,
Atta, are you ready? Let's go through it.
that's granted to us in the Constitution.
Thank you. Justice Taylor, did you want to have a comment?
Yep, thanks, Judge. Unless something's changed and I'm unaware of it, statutorily, CUPs, you just said, are illegal. The process we've been using is illegal. Counselor Lester has a different track record. Perhaps he is a magician in the legal world and has won quite a few appeals of the CUP process. So to sit here and say that what we've been doing since 2006 is blanket carte blanche against the law, number one, is a lie. Number two, to act like that is a reason to bully your way into this simplified 180-page law, for anybody sitting here listening, is laughable.
Just a second.
So
Just a second.
to try to merge
Justice
the
Taylor,
executive
I have a point of
with
order
the-
that I have to address. Justice Secchi? Yes, ma'am.
Judge, my colleague is acting in decorum, and I'd like to remind you to remain in decorum and calling people liars.
I didn't call anybody a liar. I said that was a lie. So nobody.
Well, whatever is,
what's
that's
the
in
rebuttal
decorum.
to that? Is
That's
it a
in
lie or
decorum.
not?
This is not a court
Okay.
of law, and I believe that you're acting out of order, Judge.
Okay.
Thank you.
Justice Taylor, you want to finish your comments?
I do, thank you. So to sit here and say that the 2006 process that we've had in place with CUP suddenly is spot zoning and is therefore illegal is simply not true. And so that is not enough reason to pass this. Now, are there other reasons to pass this? There very well may be. That is not it.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Taylor. What I can tell you is, all I can do is go back on what my legal advisors are telling me here within the county. And that's they see nothing but heartache and lost civil cases over this if we continue down this path. Are we ready for Director Atta? Justice Lyons?
Thank you, Judge. What is the status of the ordinance? I've heard there's changes still coming, changes that aren't in the package yet. What is the status of the ordinance?
Director Atta, do you have any updates there?
Yes, sir. So Brian and I, we sat about a week, almost a week ago, and we went over a few of the stuff that need to be changed. So far, we have an updated version, but it needed, the only reason it was not posted online, so we just make sure that we get all the feedbacks before we just produce something, that we don't add to the confusion that is already existing. And Brian can chime in if he has any. But yeah, we do have an updated version.
Great.
Yeah.
So just make sure I understood. There's an updated version coming.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's what you'll present tonight.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
it's based on the changes that we heard from you and the constituents. And alrighty, finally. And that is basically it. So one of the biggest changes we have is we've heard lots of confusion about the C1, C2, which is basically the commercial use. To make it much, much easier, we went back, I guess it's page 74. If not, let me just say, go to 74. Might be, oh yeah, 76, there you go, close. So we did the ag use.
Just a second, Director Atta.
I'm not sure I understand.
Will you cue your mic?
So the ordinance that's on my computer right now is not the one that's up there.
I don't know what you have, honestly. I don't know, I don't have a copy of that.
It was the ordinance that was sent out in the agenda.
So the one like from previous time, right?
I don't, that's what I need to know.
Yeah, I honestly have no idea what you have. If it's like on the agenda, that would be the previous one. That's the one like we added like to it. We added and changed. It's not like a substantial change as much as you're gonna see.
So, hang on, so just to finish, right? I think my understanding, and if it's wrong, tell me, okay? What I've read is not where we're at. There's a new one coming. So I'd like to hear a summary of those changes, which I think you're getting ready to go through, which is good. But I'm not ready to discuss it until I sit down and read it again. But I'd love to hear the changes, and then we can go from there.
Sure, we're gonna
That
go
makes
through every
sense?
bit of it.
Thank you.
Director Ada?
Sure. So that's one of the major change. You might think it's a major. So we have the ag residential designation. And instead of the C1, C2 complicate everything, we just like combine both of them into commercial use. And the third one would be the industrial. As a result, we changed like the zoning district, like the table of uses into like commercial and industrial, what's permitted, what not. If you see a P, it's permitted. If you don't see anything, it's not permitted. Any project that goes like through the quorum court and then approved for commercial use and goes through the planning board, it has to have like conditions on it to make sure it's compatible with the surrounding. It's the same thing we do right now. If you remember like from the previous time, I showed you this diagram. Let me just find it. Go back. Okay, there you go, this one here. So that is like just simplified idea of like how it's gonna work if this has been approved. So as an applicant, if you are not in the designated like commercial use zones, you're gonna come and apply for like a rezoning application. The rezoning application goes to the quorum court. If it's approved, it goes back to the planning board through the whole process again. If it's been denied, either the applicant or the neighbor, any denial from the quorum court goes to the circuit court. The process is going to be, we need the application to be submitted to the planning board 21 days before the quorum court, so we'll be able like to send the neighbor notification to the neighbor like 14 days ahead of time. And then we come here and discuss like the general idea of the process. If it's being approved and you create an ordinance for it to move forward for like for rezoning as commercial, as I said, it goes back to the planning board through the 5-week cycle, and we put the conditions on it with the staff report. If not, they have the option to appeal. So that's as simple as it gets.
Just a second, Justice Dean, do you have a question for this?
It's about something different here. It's pertaining to the zoning, but it's about the pits and how they're gonna be zoned.
Okay, you
You
wanna,
know, how are we gonna act on zoning the pits?
like,
Dirt
mining
pits and
operation?
stuff
Oh,
like
the mining
that.
is industrial. So like so far we have not received any from the previous 20 years, anything that was not like an expansion to an existing. We've never received an application that says, I need to create like a mine or the dirt pit that's like out there somewhere else. So, but that is gonna go through the whole like process. It's gonna be the same thing. You apply for like a high intensity industrial zoning, and based on the criteria the applicant's gonna give us, we bring it here, and it's up to the court to decide. If it's approved, it goes to the planning board process, the same idea as everything. We're gonna notify, because it's a high intensity, half-a-mile radius instead of like 300 feet. And then like we go from there. If it's approved through you, we know exactly what conditions we're gonna put on it.
Okay, thank you.
Justice Rio Stafford, do you have a question?
Well, more of a comment, and this is maybe something that could wait toward the end, but yes, it is about this part of the process. But first of all, I wanted to thank you,
I appreciate you, thank
and
you.
I wanted to thank the planning staff for all your work on this. And I appreciate, I've tried to say this at every meeting that we've discussed this. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the hard work that the county staff has done.
And we truly appreciate your feedback. You've always been awesome, so.
Thank you. And I know that your hard work is appreciated, and I know that that people's hearts are in the right places in trying to
Definitely.
in trying to move things forward. Just looking at this sort of map, I think this is very helpful for us. And I think one of the concerns that we have been hearing from constituents, and I haven't brought this up before, so I apologize for just bringing this up for the first time, but in seeing this map, I think one of the concerns is that the rezonings are coming, oh, no, I'm sorry, it was that chart you had
the
up,
chart?
not the
Okay.
map, this chart here, yeah. Is that the rezoning requests are coming directly to the quorum court without first going through planning commission, which is sort of how a lot of cities do it. You know, if there's a rezoning request, it goes through the planning commission first, and then it comes to the legislative body. And so I wanted to sort of put the idea in people's heads, maybe between that yellow step and the green step, the potential of putting a step in between there where the rezoning request would come through the planning commission first. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, one of the reasons that the planning commission exists is that they are supposedly have expertise. They're appointed by the county judge because they have some knowledge in this area, and this is what they do as a body. This is all that they're focused on, right? And so I want to put the idea out there that maybe we want to rely on their recommendations, you know, in making our decisions. And number two, they would also act as sort of a filter in a way. So if the planning, if a rezoning request is turned down first by the planning commission, it does not come to us unless there is an appeal. And that would potentially reduce the number of rezonings that we hear, and we're also relying on their expertise. So, you know, I think maybe a little later when we get into looking at whether to amend this or not, a little later in this meeting, I'm not going to do it right now, I'm going to let the presentation continue on, but I wanted to sort of put that thought in people's heads, and when we get to that point, I would like to bring an amendment for us to discuss of adding in that step. So, thank you.
Yeah, just clarifying, so if we add that step is basically what we do right now. So we're gonna go through the whole process before we get back to you. And that's gonna put like lots of overburden and like lots of like financial like overburden on the applicants. If it goes to the planning board, engineers are gonna be involved, and like the neighbor notification again is gonna be involved. So they're gonna do the whole process again and pay for the whole thing. And then there is a potential they come back to the quorum court and be denied. So we're not basically changing anything that other than like we're changing the rezoning application from a CUP application. So I'm not sure, like if we're gonna add the planning board in between, that's basically what we do right now. Because once it goes to the planning board, the tech review is gonna kick in, the engineer review is gonna kick in, the neighbor notification is gonna kick in, and all of this. So we're gonna do the whole process. And let me tell you, that's a representation of like what the ordinance that we presented says. It has not changed a lot. Even the newer like one, it did not change from like the process, this process. The thing you need to keep in mind that this also, your decision is gonna be, so the work is not here as much, the work is after the decision is made. If this is approved, it's gonna be like an overall like for us to do all the application forms. It's gonna be the being able to adjust the calendar, submittal calendar. So we're gonna have maybe like 2 or 3 submittal calendars different than each other, because like one for the rezoning, one for the planning board, and maybe one for something else. So that is like a lot of stuff like you don't see in the background. If you go to our website, for instance, oh, let me think, it's thinking. And I don't wanna just confuse you, but if you go to projects and meeting and you have the review and planning board meeting schedule, if you download this is like too much work. This is tied to almost every calendar like date for the quorum court and the county and the holidays and even the engineers and the surveyors we work with, because they want to make sure like what fits theirs and what fits ours as well. So in this case, if we're going to create a new one for the rezoning, it's going to be completely separate. It's going to be submittal, neighbor notification, quorum court, and then it's going to be the planning board. So it's going to be completely different than this. And then this is going to be created based on that one, so we can go through the planning board to accumulate for the new rezoning. So that is too much work. And on top of all of this, our department has its own calendar. When we produce the notification, when do we produce like the maps, when we send out stuff, when we send out like the planning board tech review, when we send out like the resubmittal day, and when we send out like the packets for the planning board. So there is lots of stuff like you don't see in the background of like things, and that all is gonna change. Once again, if you go back to our planning and you go to the applications and information, all of this is gonna change. All those links is gonna be like new. And so your decision is your timely decision is very helpful to us as well, because like all of this need to jive with everything we do before the end of the year, so like the applicants or their representative be able like, to know when and how and what and how much. So just keep this in mind. Yep. And like for instance, this page here that says ordinance and regulations, we have lots of stuff from like the past 20 years. It's very helpful information here. And there is one here about the planning board and the zoning board of adjustment that exactly explains what they do and with all the ordinances that attach to it. So our page is like, has like wealth of knowledge. So, go back. So,
Director Addo, we've got a couple more questions, I think, that have
Yes.
accumulated. You want to try to address those?
Absolutely.
Justice Lyons?
Thank you, Judge. As everybody, appreciate everything you do.
Thank you so much,
Your team does. I really appreciate, because you do more than what's in here and what you've already done. The number of questions you field from me
On a weekend.
on a weekly basis, on the weekend, and I really don't expect to get it, but I tell you what, if you don't want to make Sam reply, don't text him on a weekend.
No, I always do.
But I do appreciate all the help that you do provide here and in between the meetings. I have a question and then a comment. One question.
Yes,
So
sir.
in this table, great.
Yes, sir.
Great place. This table used to have a C,
Yes, sir.
P, C, or blank,
Yes.
right? We've removed the C, so that means it's P or blank,
So it's either
which means
permitted.
the only way to change something is rezoning. Is that correct?
It's not necessarily. There is like, if it's gonna be rezoned commercial automatically, it's gonna be like commercial, but it has to go also through the planning board to go through the conditions. And that is being explained down there with something we call the procedures. It's down here.
Okay.
That's like the major change you're gonna see. What does it mean? It tells you exactly, if you apply here, it fits here, it needs to go through that process and what kind of process is gonna go to and the timeline for each one of them. If it's been denied, that's what's gonna happen. Yes, it's like basically procedures, times, and like what and what not. And we adjusted lots of stuff that used to say like you cannot apply within 12 months. So we made things that like looks easier and more like straightforward and like makes sense to almost everyone.
Okay, now, I'll look at it. It sounds like it's either for commercial, it can go there, and then it goes through all the technical review and everything. Or it can't, and you gotta rezone for whatever it is you need, and then go through the, but I'll read through it, that's fine, sorry.
No, it's gonna be permitted for that specific use.
Right,
It's not just like for commercial, for that permitted use. And remember, we have ag, residential, and industrial, and we do have like the commercial in general. So
right there you got
which
your-
one, for instance?
you scroll down, you had airport or airstrip.
Oh, yes.
No, you went by it.
I don't
Or
know.
even there,
Lost it?
either of those blanks. Under commercial, it's blank.
Here.
So if I want to put an airport or an airstrip,
It has to be like an industrial, because like airport is
so you have to go
huge.
through rezoning to get it. Okay,
Yeah,
that's fine.
definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and besides, like, it's also like, remember, like, we have like size limits. So the commercial use could be like up to 1 acre or more. For the industrial, it has to be a minimum of 5 acres or more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a comment is JP Rio Stafford identified maybe putting a step in there to have the rezoning go through planning before it comes to us. Your comment was that would put all the cost up front, but does it have to? I mean, why would we, if it's coming to the quorum court as it's written now, all that technical review is not required. Why do we need to require that for a rezoning request if it's going to the planning board? Why not keep the requirements the same, therefore you don't get into that financial, you don't get into all that time? Have the planning board, because I mean, that's today on the cups. We rely on the planning board being the experts, right?
Yeah, I agree, but like
Just something to think about.
yeah, the other thing is like the way we take stuff to the planning board and try to present it is based on the feedback we get from the technical reviews.
Review.
Yeah, so there is no way I can say it's like, oh, that's gonna work, because like, I believe the engineer is gonna agree with us. And like, let's say that happened, and then the engineer says, oh, no, it's not gonna work. So I cannot
Maybe
promise, I
maybe
cannot
just-
promise you something
just-
that does not
Just think
exist.
about it, but that's
Yeah.
fine. I got it. No problem. Thank you.
I'm trying not to talk a lot. I've lost my voice yesterday. I think that we can make that happen, where the planning board would look at that before you did. The question becomes, and you've got to ask yourself, are you going to rely on the expertise of the planning board or not? Because I know it's not intentional right now, but the way this quorum court has operated, at least for the 8 years that I've been here, is it does not rely on the planning board unless it's what you want to do. So the planning board goes through these long meetings and they do this, and then it's almost like if we get enough people to show up and say we don't like it, then it's like we'll disregard the expertise of the planning board because people don't like it. And so for us, it becomes more of an issue of, are we just creating an extra governmental step that is going to be completely disregarded? And so that's kind of the thought process. The legislative part of planning is the zoning. That's the legislative part. Everywhere you go, that's the legislative part. The rest of it, the technical part's not legislative. I'm no offense to any of you, but that's not how it's treated. It's technical. It's to the people that are experts. It's to the engineers and the architects. That's what it is. You set those rules. They apply those rules in a way that makes the properties conform with those around them. Mm-hmm. So the legislative act that you do, even in the CUPs, the legislative part is that zoning, is that, yes, you can do this because it's currently zoned residential or agricultural. So in order to skip all of the unneeded necessary steps, it's, hey, let's get the quorum court to say, yes, we agree to change this. And there are criteria that we will go through that you'll have that'll say, here are the things to consider. Proximity to similar, in certain, in other aspects, and we'll get all that. But that would be what the request is, and why it wouldn't go to the planning board and then go to you, because we're creating time steps and another step. So there is that.
Thanks, Brian. And like to add more information to this, when we go to the technical review, normally the engineers will review based on the engineering aspects of it, and then when they send us the reviews, they send like snippets of like our code and says like, your code says that. That's why we're requesting this. So sometimes our code might be more restrictive or less restrictive, so they weigh our code like based on what the engineering aspect of it as well. So they always like both of them. It's not like the decision is not because I'm an engineer and I know more. It's like, yeah, that's how it's done technically, but it's also like your regulation says like we cannot have more than like 30-foot like wide access easement, for instance. And we tried to do, I'm sorry.
Justice Lyons, did you have follow-up there? Or?
Yeah, just real quick, I appreciate that, Counselor. So what I'm hearing is zoning shouldn't look at it from a technical standpoint.
That's
where the
correct.
planning board comes in to make sure that the technical engineering stuff's done. Zoning's legislative and more, the criteria is not technically focused, but there's other focus that will be provided.
That is correct. When we talk about the problems that we have been fortunate not to get a good challenge. I often urge you all when I sit here, when you start talking about conditions you want to put on a project, you'll probably see me and heard me say, whoa, 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 whoa. There's a reason for that, because that becomes very difficult to defend should it be properly challenged. We've been fortunate that we've not had that. But as our county becomes more sophisticated and grows, I can guarantee you that that's coming, that's on the horizon. And so to go to that a little bit, back to J.P. Koger, you know, you listed off all those things that the county judge does. Well, we haven't changed in this ordinance anything with that. Those processes are either statutory or the quorum court has voted and decided amongst itself to put these procedures into place. Certainly, if there are procedures that now you say, hey, we don't like that, well, let's talk about that and how we repeal that and change it. But nothing in this new ordinance changes any aspect of any of those things. It doesn't. The majority of this draft that you got deals with ordinances that date back to the 70s. Zoning didn't come about until 2006. That's why the only part of this that's really different, other than a few minor changes that aren't global changes that change the complete outcome, but we put the burden of notifying people now on the applicant instead of on the county to save money and save time, and making some updates to some archaic language, and maybe we change some acronyms because they've changed since the 70s. The real guts of any change here only is what you find in the zoning part, this section 7. The rest of it is really copy and paste from 100+ ordinances that predate the zoning aspect of this, and are a lot of it has to do, as you'll read, it's real technical about roads. That all comes from this thing called the Green Book.
Yeah, the AASHTO.
The Green Book is what determines how thick our roads have to be. State law requires we do that in order to not get sued and to continue to have federal funding. So those are things that we wouldn't want to get in and change here because we're going to mess ourselves up on that. So that's kind of where we are. You know, when we look at this, it's just this 7 that we're looking at on making changes. And we're not taking the legislative aspect out. We're saying, hey, we want to get that part done first so that people can then invest in their engineering and their architecture if they want to move forward. And then we leave it up to the experts who have to have a certain background in order to sit on one of these boards. And those people have to be confirmed by the quorum court. Yes, the county judge gets to nominate. The quorum court can say, no, this person isn't qualified. So I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime about some of the what you feel like may be overreach of the legislative branch. I've always been a big proponent of everybody stays in their lane and this thing works a lot better. But all of those issues that were brought up, they're either set by ordinance or they're set by state law on that.
Brian.
As it relates to the industrial, there's been some questions, I know. We are not adding any industrial zones, 0. If it currently exists because it was grandfathered in, it was in existence prior to zoning, then it will continue to have that industrial use because we can't undo that, okay? But anybody else that wants an industrial use will have to come and ask the quorum court. It's like the airport. You're not gonna build a major airport in Washington County unless the quorum court tells you that you can do that. Otherwise, if we say it can go permitted in commercial, we may have an airport right out on the side of the interstate or something. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Those are big projects that need legislative review. There are a lot of we don't get a lot of big projects like that. We get a lot of small projects where we wanna say, hey, in order to keep you from building next to Farmer Smith's farm that his family's had for 400 years in Washington County and ruining what he has out there, we want you to build along this road where there's other commercial activity, where the infrastructure is better, where we're not having to worry about a bunch more cars, right? That's kind of what we were looking at. Now, granted, you all own this. You can change this however you want to, but we had to have a starting point. Can you imagine if we came in here with hundreds of pages of blank sheets of paper and pencils and said, hey, we're all gonna get together and write a new zoning code? We'd never get it done. I couldn't get it done if we didn't have help from regional planning on this. I mean, it's a lot. It is a lot. I get it. Our planning is a lot. It takes a long time. 8 years. 8 years. I don't understand all of it fully. But this is kind of where we are at a starting point From here, we need to change it. We need to talk about what needs to change. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you for like reminding me with this. Like, yeah, see, Jeff Hawkins from like the planning and the regional planning worked on this for like the past 4 years or more. And he's the gospel like on planning. He worked like basically in like multiple like city in the state of Arkansas and outside within a county and a city. Settings. So the guy, when I sat with him, Brian, and like even like the previous like Brian's assistant, like deputy, so he said like that is wrong. That does not like fit what the state says. And one of them was like the notification. He says like you're the only county in the state of Arkansas, maybe like in the nation, that like sends that notification. It's always the applicant, because that puts the responsibility of him. It's his project. If it becomes our responsibility and we make a mistake or like we miss a date, there is a big possibility that we get sued for it, for not meeting our ordinances for any reason. Someone gets sick, or like we have like a snow day or something like that. And it happened before. We had to call and cancel because of that. So, and once again, as like I showed you this like last time, that's just a snippet of the old ordinances about like one part of the notification. And if you notice down there, it's built on an ordinance that's been adjusted from a previous one. What we've done is just we fixed everything into one section. For instance, it's going to be included in one ordinance, which is the one we presented to you. If in case the quorum court decided like, yeah, we don't like it, we're going to fix, and instead of going and adding another one here to adjust the previous one, that adjusts the previous one, we can say like we just adjust this one and we'll move on. Oh no, that's just like that's a snippet from like one of my, yeah. Yes, I'm trying to confuse everyone here. Yeah, so once again, that's a sample of our like ordinances online. You can say pay number 1, number 2, and here you go. Each one of them is an ordinance. You have to click on it and read all of it to get to the point says, yeah, that might not fits what I need, and move on. So it's a lot. You can see they're all like 2006. That's when almost everything happened. The magic happened for zoning. So I'm gonna like cancel this so I don't confuse anyone.
Director, we got a couple more questions that have
Yes.
accumulated if we go just a second. Justice
Yes.
Taylor?
Thank you, Judge. Couple things. Director Ada, first, I've not really keyed in on this, so forgive me if I'm late to the party, but can you explain or talk a little bit about the zoning official? Is that something we have right now?
Well, we added this based on the suggestion of Jeff Hawkins. And this is like, so the administrative, planning administrator, we had this like from like forever. I mean, we had approval letters that looks exactly the same as now when we do like an exemption for like, you come to us and split your land, and we go to the database and we download that like approval letter says like planning administrator.
Right.
So that is just a designation for anyone who works in the planning office. It's not like you or me.
Okay.
It's anyone who's been assigned to work for the planning department by judge, which basically
Right.
we all fall under his department, and he hires all of us.
I see.
Same as the zoning. He said like, maybe this will take off like in about like 5-6 years. It's going to be a big deal. We might like just hire someone specifically to do just like zoning. The same as if you go to like, for instance, some cities, they have like the permitting department, which is part of the planning. They just like do building permits.
Strictly permitting.
Yeah, and they do have their like supervisor. They go outside, they do inspection. That is separate department. So like they call it the permitting director. So that's sort of thing. We just like added this in case of coming back. So it's like, hey, let's amend this and add this definition.
So it's a role, like, just so I'm understanding you completely, as it relates to the proposed statute or ordinance, the zoning official is an office and/or a person
And
set
an
forth
employee
in
who
there.
works for the planning department.
Right now, you're saying that role is effectively done by your office?
Yeah, we
In
do, we do
aggregate?
everything. We cross-train everywhere. I mean, like if I'm out, my team will be able like to cover for
Okay.
me.
Okay. Great. Well, so that's not really something new? Like, would you call that an addition or not really?
That's like a new definition, but it's not like the principle is not new. I mean, like we do have that like as the planning administrator. And
Yes,
it covers everything.
it's new in the code because we
Yeah.
didn't have a zoning official.
But the role is not new, though.
No, and so the way it's, the default on it is
he does
that
it now.
he is the zoning official unless there's a need. There's no intent here to make planning bigger. If that has to happen, we've already got it set up so that we can designate who's doing what in those two positions. But right now, you're exactly right. It all falls directly by default back to the
His
planning
office
director.
is performing all the
That's correct.
duties.
Yeah,
that-
and like,
okay.
it's also like the on top of all of this, the way they have the designation is, I am the one, or not me, like any person in my position, he is the one responsible for signing all the plats. The same as like judges are responsible for the final like signature on the plats. So if I'm not there, like the plat will wait until like I sign them, or like the director of the department signs them, because it's a responsibility. Just basically, as a project manager, he says like, hey, that came out of my office under my supervision and it's been approved. So
Okay.
that's-
Think of
that's
it
also-
this way too. It's kind of the same thing with the planning board and the zoning board, right? They're two different, they have two different functions.
But same people.
Under state law, they can be and are by default the same people, but they have two different functions and they're called two different things for those functions.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Second question, or, commentary, I guess. We've heard a lot of feedback on the whole, zoning, and I think the other day you told me roughly 4,000, give or take, parcels would be affected by I'm not worried about the numbers, but that was what we said the other day, right? Like,
So when we started, before like we start trimming the stuff, we started like with 4,000 plus. It was about like 5,400,
Okay.
4,500. And then we start like eliminating the subdivisions, the state and the federal like lands, because we have
Yeah.
no oversight over them. So we dropped like to 3,227 out of the dynamic, because like those parcel changes, out of like almost 100,012.
that was gonna be my next question.
Yeah,
Okay,
so we have that dynamic. I mean, like, Judge like showed you that subdivision the other day.
Right.
That is gonna add about like 27 new parcels. We just approved one, like, the planning board approved one that has 60. So that number is like always dynamic. So
Yeah.
those $4,000, like 4,000, 3,000.
3 or 4.
Give or take. It might be like tomorrow, like less or more based on someone comes and
Yeah.
split for his family. So it's really not that big if you look at them based
Okay.
on like the bigger like idea of if I add the parcels like to this map, and I'm gonna show you this also.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot
It
of
becomes
lines.
very crowded. I mean, like if you do this and you zoom in, and almost everyone used this before, and you can see how crowded it gets. It's just ugly.
Yeah, no,
It's a lot.
I agree, but, okay, so we'll call it between 3,000 and 4,000, right?
Yes, sir.
Depending on the day. That's what's gonna be affected effectively by the commercial designation, is that right?
Yeah, and like as we mentioned like earlier, like the quorum court has the right, or like has the ability to go and trim as much as they want.
Or
And
expand.
or yes, expand or like remove. It's
Right.
if you feel that this street like or like this highway, it's not suitable for that based on your like jurisdiction or your like area, you're like familiar with your area more than me. You would say like, I've never seen any businesses beyond this point, so I don't think that's a great idea. We can go ahead like and remove. The idea I did not remove or added anything recently because it's tedious work. Once you start removing, it's hard to bring them back. You have to restart the process
yeah.
again. Geospatial data is just like very finicky. So once you remove, it's normally hard to get it back, and I really don't want to restart again. It takes about like, we started this in March, and now like it's September, so it's almost October. So-
Well, so that's a great like precursor or segue into kind of what I was getting at, is that, we're gonna, in theory, if this passes as it is right now, take essentially 3,000 to 4,000 existing parcels and designate them commercial. Now, we know what that zoning means. You can have a lower use, you can't have a higher use, essentially industrial, right? So that's those parcels. But the other parcels is sort of what I wanted to kind of hear you expound on a little bit. The other 99,000, right? If we're calling it 102 minus 3, that's
Or more,
99,
yeah.
right? So those other 99,000 parcels in the county, if they are not zoned commercial or in any of those commercial designated zones,
They're ag residential.
Right,
they're
just like they
by
are right
like
now.
For all of them, yeah.
just like they are right now.
Yep.
Yep.
Nothing's gonna change. And I'm gonna show you this, like it's a simple trick. So if you go to the preliminary zoning, for instance, and you zoom into your area, I'm gonna turn this on, and that's why it's added there. It's just like you.
There's probably not many in that
hey.
one.
It's enough. So you can always go and see what's going on here. I know it's not too many, but you can hit the print, and you can like print and generate like a PDF, and you can doodle on it and see like, oh, I like this, I don't like this, or you can give me. So you don't have to have a big print of everything. So you can
Okay.
create your own, like in any size, any zoom.
That's cool.
Any everything. So like, and that applies to almost everything.
Okay, so of those 99,000, right, that
Mm-hmm.
aren't gonna be put into that commercial category, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
The process is what's gonna change for those people, right?
Yes.
If they wanted to start a business on their property, that would necessitate what we would call now a
So-
CUP.
Yeah, so if it, like, let's say if it is within those, like, parcel that becomes,
That didn't
zone
change.
commercial.
No, the one
Yeah,
that's not
you
changed.
don't have to. You don't have to go and like start a business, or like it's not forcing you to have a business.
No, I know that. I'm saying the other ones, right?
Oh, the other
That-
ones,
yeah.
they have to go through the process, come and apply for rezoning and justify why. If it's approved here, it goes back to the planning board.
And so now, under this proposed ordinance, that bar is a little bit different than it is today, is that right?
Well, look, we're gonna make sure that is very, I don't wanna say restrictive because we don't like use that word, but it's gonna be like really why you're gonna establish a business that like way far out there. I know, like you might tell me, hey, that's the only like parcel I own.
Right.
My dad gave me this.
Which is a lot of.
Yeah, that I inherited this, I understand, but
Right.
it needs to be like, basically, are you gonna be more comfortable like of doing this instead of doing that, so to stay within the agricultural aspect, residential aspect, so like, it's.
Because we're
don't go
pushing
out-
that to a
don't go
different-
out crazy on like doing like a big business, basically, don't annoy noise and everything, and that's basically what we do right now.
Right.
We have lots, our ordinance did not change when it comes to compatibility. We try not to, as I said, like not restrictive as much as controlled. We regulate, make sure that like everyone applies, follow the same rules as much as possible based on the location. So, and that's what we do.
So, you know, the 3,000 roughly parcels aside, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were to explain to someone that owns one of the other 99,000 parcels,
Mm-hmm.
how would you tell them this is making their life easier in the case that they wanted to change their use, or is
So
it?
if you're applying for a business outside those like areas, like those corridors, we're gonna make sure that you go through like a rigorous process, and
Okay.
the quorum court has to approve it and be the legislative part, and says, yes, we agree to that. And then we go to the planning board and put like those constraint on you, or with the conditions we use.
Yeah.
And you're gonna abide by them. Since you're being approved by the quorum court, you basically approved for everything is gonna follow.
But the bar, and I'm not trying to
It
put
is.
words in your mouth, but as Brian just said, the zoning is the only role of the legislative body,
Yes, sir.
right? So if an applicant is in a particular parcel wanting to change the use, they have to have a really, really good reason,
And
essentially.
they have
is
to
what
come
we're saying.
back and like come through you guys and says like, hey, you agreed to do this. Well, the zone, like right now, the quorum court will come and says like, how about like not doing this and do that? At that part, I'm not sure like how we can like manage conditions through the quorum court. Maybe we might not. But the idea is,
With zoning, though,
yeah,
right, at that
the
point.
idea is like you have, once it's approved for zoning, for like commercial use, you have to agree to all the conditions comes after that. And we always add this as a disclaimer, like in the condition, any change like on the use, current use that's being approved, it has to go through the planning board and possibly the quorum court for like approval.
So in other words, like to boil it down, if you were one of those 99,000 parcels and you had an intended potential commercial use down the line, this is going to make that a totally different scenario than you're looking at today. Is that right?
I mean, it's not going to be as complicated as like that, but there is a possibility that you are able to rezone that commercial.
possible.
And go like through the process. We're not going to restrict anyone from like using his land.
Right, but that's one of the changes, though, I guess, is what I'm trying to make sure I'm.
We're trying
I'm
to
sure
direct
about.
everyone like to like one, like multiple location that has like the access, the as like Judge mentioned in the beginning of his presentation, is we have the facilities, we have like all the access, we have the utilities available for you, makes it easier on everyone else. The noise is there like on 412 or 16. It's already there. We don't want to add noise to someone who lives out there like in the country. That's why people move to the country.
Right, which
Yeah.
there's always that, dynamic that we're having to balance here is the neighbors', intent, the landowner's intent, and how each are affected, so.
Yeah, and that's why like that part of the rezoning, we've seen where is it? It's here. We added that part where the neighbors are gonna be notified so they can come and let you know what's
Yeah.
going on. And I believe also like that process might not be like instant, like, oh, we're gonna approve it today. We might say like, okay, let's discuss this like further next time. Yeah, so it's all like quote unquote like legislation process.
Okay. And last question, I
Yes, sir.
guess, was, so out of the, since 2006, and you may have this data, you may not, how many CUPs are there outstanding right now? Do you know?
I don't wanna say exactly 320, but it's like in that, it's like less than 350.
So this
and-
is a big jump.
Yeah, and some of them also, like, you don't know if they're still like using the same, if it's been there or not. So they were granted, and the idea was if you're granted a CUP for that use, for a coffee shop, if you need to change that coffee shop to something else, you have to come and reapply. That reverts back to agricultural residential. And that's the whole idea. Like, we are not sure like exactly how many, because we don't have inspection and we don't have building permits for people to come back. So we have good faith in people like whenever they want to change, and that happens a lot. And you're gonna see this like recently. One guy got approved for a CUP and discovered that business was gonna make him money. So he now reapplying for like a new CUP on the same lot. So that new CUP is gonna like wipe the previous one, and the new one is gonna be approved, hopefully, is gonna like replace that. So that's part of it has to go through the planning board and possibly the quorum court.
Okay.
Yep.
So, I mean, one way to look at this, though, is, okay, since 2006, we've had 300, more or less, approved CUPs. We're gonna add 3,000 that are not
Possibly,
current-
like,
possibly,
it doesn't-
somewhere around
Yeah,
there.
so like there is lots of them on like lots of highways. That's sort of, I mean, like I know lots of places that's marked as residential, as like commercial on Highway 16, that they have homes on it and cows, and I don't
Yeah.
think they're gonna change. I don't think they care.
Yeah, and the concept that, I guess my point is that, one of the things that we heard at the last meeting was the idea of this like sudden boom in building and expansion and in
That would be great, but I don't
industry.
think it's gonna happen like
Right, like,
once this is approved.
This is literally saturating the marketplace with CUPs that otherwise weren't there. So it's not gonna be a gold rush, we don't think.
Yeah, it's honestly the biggest thing we've been seeing for the past 2 years is not as much CUP as subdivisions and land splits.
Oh,
So like, as I mentioned, like last time we approved like 2 subdivisions. Right now, south of like the one that's being approved like last week, south of it, it's just like on that corner, there is another one. So that was approved for 60
So
lots.
really it's one.
This one is like 50 lots. And that's basically what's happening in that area. It's mostly like subdivision. People need more homes than big businesses or like industrial businesses. I don't think like we might see that like change within like a year or two, or like once this is approved, like we're gonna be inundated with like lots and lots
Yeah.
of like businesses like the same month.
right. And if anything, it should quiet down on the, application front, as far as any rezoning requests go, we would think.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. I mean, nobody like thought like that CUP is gonna pick up and like 20 years after, like it's the best thing ever for most people.
Yeah.
Or like not. It depends
Yeah.
on like who you
Right,
ask.
which side you're on, right? of
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Absolutely. So let me show you this. So that's what we have right now on our website. And we were like asked by many JPs, like how about like to do the notes?
Just a second.
Yes, sir.
I think we have another question
more
over
question?
here. I
Oh.
think I would like to get that answered before we move.
Absolutely.
Justice Koger?
Thank you very much, Judge. Yes, Mr. Atta, if you could pull up the flow chart that you had again on rezoning just for a moment, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to go back briefly to what JP Rios Stafford said a while ago. And the reason I think it's a good idea to have the rezoning go to the planning board first is because we get a lot of knowledge and information from that hearing, that public hearing that the planning board has.
We have the public hearing here, like it says like 14 days later, like we notify the neighbors. So the neighbors are gonna come here.
Right.
Yeah, so they're gonna come before you instead of going to the planning board for that purpose.
But that cuts out a process for the neighbors.
We can, so once this is approved here, it's gonna go back to the to the planning board, and they have the right to come and like attend the planning board and like voice their concern as well. So it's not gonna be eliminated. The planning board process is not gonna change. So we're notifying them, telling them that person next door is gonna become like a business, he applied for it, it comes to the planning board, to the quorum court, and he comes and says like, well, I don't need this. If it's being approved, it's awesome. If it's not approved, we're done. If it's approved, goes to the planning board, and the planning board will have a meeting that the public can come to. All our like meetings are open to public, anyone can come and attend.
Could you say that again? If it's approved, we're done? Is that what you said?
What, I mean, like if it's approved here, it has to go through the process of the planning board. So anything is being rezoned. I don't think that's super complicated. So if it's being rezoned and approved by the quorum court, we're done with that process. It has to go through the planning board process. So it's two of them, two processes going at the same time from the planning board, like for the quorum court rezoning, and goes back to the planning board for the conditions. And the tech review. The planning board is not changed. The process for the planning board is not changed. The tech review and the resubmittal, the setting before, setting with the applicants before to show them what is viable, what is not, what to expect, and then like through the planning board, the tech review, and all of this to go to the presentation and their like decision on like what to add, what not to add of a condition that we impose on them. So most of the time, the planning board will add condition, and we adjust that based on like what we hear back from them. That is not gonna change. The planning board process is not gonna change. The only change is the rezoning request. It comes to you, neighbor will be notified, they can come and say like, I don't like it, or I like it, and it's up to you to make the decision, yes or no. If it's yes, it goes through the planning board. If it's no, they have the right to appeal, either one, either side, the people, the neighbors or the applicant.
Okay, let me think about that for a minute, and I'll get back to you.
Right?
Because, I mean, I'm only going by what's in the ordinance that I had seen, so.
So we're being asked by some of the JPs like to focus on the nodes and the areas of intersections. So the circles like in red you see are half a radius, so across is like 1 mile, just like for reference. And those like most of the intersection that within the corridors. So if you like to add more, less, just like let me know, but that is basically what we've been discussing before, and that's like the nodes like JP Stafford like suggested. Since like we like to play with maps sometimes when I have extra time, so we decided to show how ugly it is if we go out 300 feet from each CUP that's been approved. This is how it's going to look like. It's not promising, right? So that is like going 300 feet from each CUP that was approved. That's how it's gonna look like. It's the same number of like, it's actually more. It's like 3,700 maybe. Yeah, almost 3,800 parcels if we do this process. If we just approve or like rezone everything from the, around like the CUPs that's being approved already. I guess this like looks much better. Yeah. So, any question on this again? Yeah, once again, remember,
I
this
just want
is,
to reiterate, due to effort, that node map, you got it. I mean, he didn't go down per parcel. That's what we were saying. We would like to get some consensus eventually where you guys, if you want to move forward with the map, because it just takes a lot of labor for him to do that, and we could get something very specific. That was just an example.
yep.
You understand? We were just throwing.
Yeah, and some JPs ask me for like a printout, like, and they were handed a printout so they can work on it. And like, I know other JPs, they're driving and they're sending me comments. What's north of this? What's south of this? What's east of this? I've never seen a business like west of that. So what do you think? And like my response, it's your area, you know it more, and like check with your constituents and let us know what works for you or what not.
Justice Dennis, did you have some questions?
Thank you, I do. It was back a slide or two, but it's really this slide. But
This one?
The whole process,
Oh,
will it, I tell you why I'm asking, you've got $20 million tied up in a project.
Oh,
and-
oh.
And you've got it tied up for 4 months. That costs you a lot of money, sitting and waiting. And so my point is it any shorter on this new process? Or is it still gonna be the long 4-month process?
Well, it is not 4 months. If it's
3 months?
yeah, the planning board process, it's always 5-week process. So, and it's always like the labor intensive and time intensive like process is going through the quorum court and have the 3 readings and like go through like the whole thing and come back and all of this.
So that can be 3 months.
So it could be like 3 months basically added
That's
to
3
all
months
of
in the
this.
quorum court,
Yes,
and
sir.
1 month for the.
Yeah, the planning board
think
never,
that's 4.
it has never changed. Like you go through the planning board 5 weeks and like you move on.
Well, don't misunderstand me. I was wanting to shorten the process.
Yep. And that is definitely should work. That's maybe what you asked for, right?
Yeah, so let me chime in here and help Sam out.
Yes, please.
You know, it'd be hard for us to, we can't really sit here and say that if this passes, this absolutely is going to work this way.
Every
Excuse me.
situation is different.
We do feel like this new process will be a lot quicker. It'll be a lot more expedient for applicants. Because what happens now is it goes through the whole process and gets to the end to find out you've wasted a bunch of time and money. Well, then you have to appeal.
Yes.
And then you have to wait. And so this new process, you don't waste that money on the front end, right? Once you get your approval, before you spend a bunch of money, you get your approval. If you're approved, then you know it's going to move forward until the end. If you don't get approved, then you can appeal, but you're not sitting on, hired engineers and architects and things and surveys that you've already paid for, maybe for nothing. And so I feel like this is going to be a lot simpler of a process. It'll be a lot easier for applicants because they'll have that knowledge. It'll also be a lot better for neighbors or for the people that live out as well. And that goes back to J.P. Taylor's questions on some of this. Yeah, there's going to be a little bit heightened scrutiny on people that are way out in the middle of the county that are wanting to do a commercial project, as it should be, because we're opening up these others to say, this is where we have determined is more advantageous for you to go. We're not trying to tell you can't do what you want with your land, but the fact of the matter is, we're already telling people what they can and can't do with their land.
That's right.
In a way that is absolutely arbitrary and capricious.
Exactly.
This helps them know that if I pick one of these properties that has already been zoned, I don't have to ask permission from the quorum court. They've already said I can have a commercial project here. I now just have to go through the process. And so for those guys, which is really where you talk about a $20 million project, they're not putting those things out in the middle of nowhere in Washington County.
Right.
They're looking for a big corridor where they can get people in. Absolutely, it speeds it up for them. I mean, absolutely it does. We're talking about a night and day difference for those people. It's the little projects that'll come along. And we've kind of made some carve outs for, we're not talking about people that say, hey, I want to have I want to have my law office at my house. We're not asking you to get a CUP. We've made some provisions for small places, people that typically use their properties for home businesses, daycares, things like that. We've carved out a section for those people and said, hey, this doesn't apply to you, because we want to encourage that. That's what typically people use their houses for. These are actual bigger, larger commercial businesses. That's really what we're talking about here. So yeah, in your big project, absolutely, those projects always look, whether it's zoned that way or not, they're always looking at those properties that are close to a corridor.
Well, and with that, I like the fact that you're letting the neighbors know way up front instead of waiting later.
I mean, I see
Because-
this as the opportunity for the quorum court. When you have neighbors that are like, hey, we live out here, we don't want this. It's easy for you to say, yeah, no, we've already told you where we want you to build this business. Sorry, you knew this when you decided to come into Washington County and do business. But as it stands now, it's like, hey, throw that dart, pray,
Yeah,
We don't know what's gonna happen.
okay,
So-
thank you.
One of the big deals
Thank
I-
you, Sam.
One of the big deals I heard when we were out talking to business owners, they said, we're not against rules. Give us the playbook, give us the rule book and leave it though. And I hope what we can understand, unfortunately, what we've done several times as a county is we've pulled people through that rule book, only at the very end to say, never mind, we had more rules we didn't tell you about, you're not gonna get this CUP. That's the arbitrary and capricious part of what we're doing right now. That's very, very dangerous.
And I've heard like many, like even my staff, like, besides like the praise we get from them for like helping them out, then like says like, hey, everything is online and go figure it out. We help out as much as we can. We normally, like most of the big projects, subdivisions and all of that, even like land splits, people come and sit with us. We tell them the process exactly, and what says like, hey, that might cost you that much, but I'm not a surveyor or an engineer, but it's gonna cost you that much, go and check and let me know if this is gonna work for you. And we've heard this also, like about this process, like this new idea from the surveying companies and the engineering companies, and says like, oh, that's basically how it's done somewhere else. So they are like for it because it simplifies their job. They don't have to go and ask for $10,000, $15,000 like plat creation fees, and then it gets denied, and then like now that applicant doesn't like that surveying for charging, or like for the engineer for charging them that much. And that happened like in multiple like occasions that came to the planning board and the quorum court. Gets approved or denied, and the applicant loses like $20,000, $30,000. So that is like easier on the applicant as well, not spending that much money upfront. And then if it's approved, it's great. If it's not approved, hey, we might look somewhere else, or like adjust, modify. We get feedback from you or from the neighbors, because most people like will go and say, I talked to my neighbors. So I cannot say like if they did or they did not. And I've heard like many times like, well, the neighbors, they did not say anything until they go to the planning board. And you hear the neighbors like, they said like, we really don't want this. So now it's like more open to the public to come and say, and the applicant will hear it upfront before spending that tons of money. Says, oh yeah, like it's really like not a great idea. Or it's a great idea, it depends. So, yeah.
Justice Taylor?
Thank you, Judge. Something that was just said reminded me of sort of maybe the example or the prime example that all of us will remember, and that would be the dreaded wedding venue. As far as, you know, whether it's arbitrary, capricious, whatever, like, does it ever fit in the neighborhood that it's going? No. Potential future wedding venues in the middle of nowhere would be affected by this, is one way to kind of look at it, in the sense that right now, the process is what it is. They show up, they either, you know, catch a good wind and people are in a nice mood and it passes, or people are, you know, just paid their property taxes and they're mad about it and it doesn't pass, right? So the randomness of that goes away for people who have that sort of use in mind at some point later on, if this were to go into play. Is that a positive, a negative, or a wash due to the fact that we're creating this, you know, 10x multiple of commercial usage that we don't already have, and designating the locale for that, you know, which is worse, I guess, is what we have to figure out. And unless you're one of those applicants for a wedding venue who hadn't really been born yet, right? Like you haven't come forward and applied, then it doesn't matter. But for those people, anywhere out there in those 99,000 parcels, that's the person this could be an issue for.
Sure, and let me address that, because you're exactly right. We know that most people don't want a rustic wedding venue on the side of I-49. We get that. One thing is we've gone 300 feet off, so there are some parcels that extend further than that where you can find, you know, you can be far enough away. But the real thing that does, that encourages applicants who are looking for something like that to work with their neighbors. Let's not kid ourselves. If an applicant comes in and they want a project that's not on one of these corridors, and the neighbors all come out and say, hey, we love this. This is gonna be great. We think this is wonderful. These are good people. They're gonna run this right. We all agree. Well, that makes it really easy for the quorum court. Makes it really easy for you to say, okay, perfect. And we've had that happen in the past. We've had things where the neighbors actually showed up and said, hey, yeah, no, we're good. And that makes it real easy. But it's those times where you've got neighbors that are like, we do not want this. Here are all the reasons why. It also makes that easy for the quorum court to say, no, we're not going to allow this. It's not proper. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and so under this scenario, then, unless you have a compelling, like, sort of, aggregate answer out of all the parties affected, then it's not likely that you're gonna be able to get the variance or the different zone, right?
I would say that's probably pretty correct.
Yeah.
Unless you own 400 acres
Yeah,
and
and
it's
you
in the
carve
middle.
out a piece out
And
of it.
nobody around, everybody's like, geez, these people, I don't even know what's happening, you know,
Which
that
that's
sort of thing.
possible, right, I guess.
And you
under that.
may have a case there where you own something, you're gonna put it in the middle and people around don't like it and you all go, wait a minute, you're never even gonna know this. These people are like half a mile from you.
Yep.
You know?
We had a project like this at the shooting range by like an expert with his wife. He owned like about 60 acres and he needed just 1 acre. So he centered it in the middle and it was the only neighbor notification
That was
we
affected,
sent.
yeah, that makes sense,
Yep.
yeah.
But that's up to the legislative body to independently assess each one of those requests and make a determination based on those factors.
Or to build the rules in on the front end, what we're doing right now, right, as far as the size and scope and all that.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that wedding venue moved here in the middle of nowhere, but it's still like everything is surrounding that like neighborhood is like just homes, and they did not think that is going to be a nuisance, and that's why it was approved. Yeah, compared like to the across the street like here, and everyone complained about it. Right. Yeah. Yep.
Justice Lyons?
Thank you, Judge. I have something else, but I want to build on something J.P. Taylor's talking about. You know, a lot of those that was addressed, the one in particular that you were talking about, J.P. Taylor, she didn't own the land. So it's not like I live here, I want to do this. I know of one, which we all approved. They lived there, they wanted to build it on their land for their daughter, and that went through. The nightmare one, she hadn't owned it. So what this does, in my opinion, is it takes us out of those scenarios where they're trying to buy and do something in an area that maybe they shouldn't be. Because here's where we want you to go, this is where you should be. They know where that's at, so it removes that unknown for them. But there's been a lot of talk, and I've heard in a lot of different places about we're infringing on property rights of people. I truly believe we started infringing on property rights. It's been said a couple of times when this ordinance, the current ordinance passed. I mean, we tell you what you can do, tell you what you can't do, and it's arbitrary. Declaration of Independence said that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So whose rights are being infringed on? If we tell you you can't build there, are we infringing on property rights, but upholding the rights of somebody to be happy and safe in their home? Which one takes precedence? It's not a black and white line. So, you know, the argument of we're infringing on property rights is not an argument to me. It's noise, because everybody has rights. They have rights. There's a lot of rights we all have. And somewhere, the government has to come in and say, we have to have safety. Everybody has to have the ability to be safe in their home. And so we have to make some decisions to decide, we did exactly that. What was that? MoCo, whatever, wanted to store 20,000 50-gallon barrels of fuel. And we said no, because you're not doing it right and it's not safe for the neighbors or anybody around you. Okay, we made a decision based on safety. Thanks.
Yeah, the welfare of public is very important.
Justice Rios Stafford?
Thank you, Judge. At the risk of stressing Mr. Lester's voice even further, I had this brought up an interesting issue about the wedding venue. If and when we, adopt this new zoning map designating commercial zoning in certain areas, and someone comes along and wants to do a wedding venue outside of that area. How do we do that without running afoul of that same issue, the law against spot zoning?
Well, somebody has to appeal that decision and not like it. And if they're doing it out and everyone out there is okay with it, the issue doesn't present itself, right? There are certain ways that spot zoning it's not considered spot zoning. I'd have to look more into it.
Okay.
But that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Okay. Yeah, it's sort of, the whole argument about the spot zoning kind of just raised that whole issue with me is once we adopt this, is everything outside of, the commercial strips essentially spot zoning?
Yeah, spot zoning is also like forced zoning, so you can't say it's like, hey, I'm forcing you like to do this in the middle of nowhere because we decided to.
Yeah.
So, and that's what becomes when the neighbor doesn't like it. And that's why, like, even the city of Fayetteville now, they do have like rezoning, and the public is hearing this, and it was approved by the city council. They did not decide like, yeah, that's gonna happen because we decided it's gonna happen. It was like approval, and they had like meetings, same what we're doing right now, so. So it's not like we're forcing you to zone your property because we decided to. That's part of it too.
Okay.
Yep.
Except the beginning. Could you pull up the node map?
Which one? This one? This one? Oh, this one here?
No, the map that you had made with the little circles around nodes.
Not the ugly one, this one here. Yeah.
That one. So some of the feedback we'd heard from some, folks who are involved in the planning and development world, the reason that this came about initially, and from some constituents, people were worried about, that zoning every parcel along every state highway might open up our county to a lot of strip development, basically. But an argument that I heard even just this past week that really kind of resonated with me and made me think about this in a different way as well, is that the state highway system, and I think RDOT even has this written into their mission or something. The purpose of the state highways is to, facilitate the efficient flow of traffic from point A to point B. And by opening up every parcel along every state highway, we might be unintentionally impeding that mission with lots of, cars coming in and out of different areas, all along. And that by concentrating, at least initially, and of course we can always build on this map at some later date and some later year, by concentrating the commercial zoning around nodes, we might preserve the purpose of the state highways in order to, preserve the efficient flow of traffic in our county.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting argument that I heard,
Yeah, last time, like
recently.
I mentioned this like about a specific project. So the state highway, they have limited amount or like designated number of egress, ingress, like exits and ramps.
Okay.
Okay, they can offer you one, or they can say like, well, like within that stretch of like a mile, we had like 5 of them, we cannot give you more. So this is not for now. This is for the future, like because like most likely they might come and say like, oh, we need to expand like 1 extra lane, and we have to give you extra. That project was on 412. The guy who did was approved for the CUP and the large scale, and he's working on finalizing it for like an RV like storage. He was so lucky to have the ramp in front of his property. And that's one of the first things the engineer went and asked the highway department, and he got the approval from them because it already existed. The guy east of that, he decided to do another project, and the state highway says like, hey, we cannot give you this because like next door had one. So that might change in the future. It doesn't mean if it's being zoned commercial, like you're forced to have a commercial business. Or like
Yes,
you
of
are
course.
allowed to if they have lots of restriction from somewhere else. Same thing on like 412, that area of Springdale is like, or like east of Springdale, Sonora area. They are serviced by the Springdale water utilities. And same thing as like in Goshen area, like Fayetteville water utilities. So they have moratorium or they have like restriction on how much like water service they can provide. It doesn't mean you cannot go and dig a well, and it happened like recently. We had like a project that like he went and spent like $6,000 and had his own well. But the idea, don't expect, because like we gave you, we rezoned this for like business commercial, you're gonna get all the amenities that comes with it that does not exist. So you're not entitled to everything that comes with what you think it should be there. If it's limited with services, it's limited with services until things happens. Same thing when we do the septic tank and like we do subdivisions. If the property doesn't perk, because that's the state law, if it does not perk, become non-buildable, you cannot build a house there. Unless if you have like connection to the city sewer or something like that. Otherwise, it stays there like empty until that thing happens and like gets improved. So it doesn't, yeah, even if you own property right now and you're gonna build a house and it does not perk and you have no other like way of dispose of that gray water, like the state will tell you you cannot. So there is lots to it. It's not because like you have it, you can't always do it.
Right. I want to thank you for putting this together. I mean,
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.
I know a lot of, I know a lot of folks in our community that we've heard feedback from might feel more comfortable if we started with maybe not trying to, you know, to use a phrase, to boil the ocean, and maybe start with nodes and expand out from there as the years go on, perhaps.
That's your discretion, guys, like whatever you decide.
But one more thing, I was wondering, because I think the version that's in our packet on the use table, would you be able to pull up the use table? Because I think the version that's in our packet is still the old one with the C1 and the C2.
Yeah,
and the conditions.
but hopefully we're gonna get this done soon.
And I was wondering if you could maybe go through.
We did not want to confuse, as I said, like confuse you more and send out like multiple versions that
Okay.
like might be out there and like, yeah.
Okay, so in the new one, C1 and C2 have collapsed into one.
It's just like
category.
commercial.
It's just commercial.
Commercial.
Okay. And then there's no conditions on that now?
Anything goes to the planning board has a condition on it, and that's like
Okay.
under the procedures, as I mentioned, it's down here.
Okay.
Just to make sure everything is compatible and everything like fits everything surrounding it. Remember, like as I said, like the welfare of the public is very important. So
Okay.
you're gonna like this one, I promise you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, part of the problem with the C1 and C2 and the conditional, it was very confusing. And the confusion is the fact that as it was written, and I think it was the public and you all that raised these questions, as it was written, if you fit in there under a permitted use, you just went out and did whatever you wanted to. And that was it. And that's not our process, and that's not the process we wanted. We have conditions, and I get that the intent behind the conditions and the conditions that we talk about are kind of different, but they're interchanged. And so we wanted to make sure that we didn't have an applicant that felt like, well, it says it's permitted right here, so I don't have to go ask anybody, I don't have to give any drawings. No, we require that. We require all of these things to be done because we want to make sure that the runoff water is appropriate for the area. We want to make sure that the parking, that the ingress and egress, that the line of sight, there's, this book tells you, depending on the speed of the road and, how far you can see determines the speed limit and how far, what you can do. I mean, there's a lot of technical things that go in, and we wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we were by no means saying, you just go do whatever you want to, we're good with it. So that's why we kind of condensed those down, because it did get very confusing. And we want to try to say, listen, we're going to permit you to do these things, but you still have to come to us so that our engineers, so that our road department, so that our emergency services and the health department, all those people can weigh in on your project and make sure that what you're doing is not detrimental to the surrounding area, the environment, all those things that we have to look at, and we always do look at. And then there's some that we say, nope, like the airstrip, nope, every time you're gonna have to come ask. We haven't gotten a lot of those, I don't think. But, I mean, those are the things that we're trying to look at to try to make it a little bit easier for everybody involved, you all as well.
There is a lot to planning. It's not like we just have our ordinances. The state has regulations. The federal government has regulations. The other department has regulation. If you notice, like, the biggest chunk of this, like, code is like road department requirements. And for like too many reasons. And that's why we do like technical review, because we don't need you to go and like split your land too many times to a point that we become responsible for like your like internal road within your like land that you split, because that's what the road department ordinance says. So they have to review it, which says, well, like, I don't think that's going to be allowable, because like otherwise we're going to be responsible, unless if you build it to our standards, so we can accept that. So that's one of the ideas. There is lots to it. It's more complicated than it looks like. And as I said, like, the state, like, federal regulation changes, and that's one of the reasons we're changing this to accommodate for that. And as Brian mentioned, the acronyms, the definitions has changed from like 20 years ago. The requirements, the percentages has changed for like the compactness and stuff like that. You approved like almost last year, like in December, you approved the floodplain requirement, the prevention code. And that was not because we decided to, because the federal government like has changed it, and we're required like to follow their changes. So whatever like regulations they ask us like to put in that ordinance, it's their regulation. It's not like we decided that we had to. The A, B, C, D you see, that is like really, they called me, we missed one of them, and he says like, I did not see C and D, you need to add that. The guy from the FEMA, it's not a joke. And the same as like the fire prevention. Each like 10 years or so, the fire prevention like code changes, and they approved it like in January 2023, and they call it 2023, but it's actually was written in 2021. So that took them that long to approve, and that's the new code. Everyone has to follow that. And it's mentioned here because the previous code did not say any specifics about like which one you need to follow. So.
Justice Dennis?
Thank you, Judge. I think you might have very well touched on the question I had. And my question was, is this constitutional? We're gonna be challenged on it, so are we doing it where it does meet the Constitution, state Constitution?
But this ordinance? Absolutely,
Okay, good. I wanna hear that.
absolutely.
Thank you. And then the other thing, to go backwards a little bit, the other thing that I have noticed, or what I've experienced or seen, or, you know, or can think of, and I'll make it up on myself instead of someone else, but let's say I have 400 acres. I remember we had an amendment that J.P. Lyons brought forth the very first time that we started this, was that if a person parked in front of their house with an RV, that was, you know, it couldn't be done. And then when you go to the thought process that someone owns 400 acres and they park their $1 million RV in front of their house because they're remodeling their $5 million house, and the neighbor says, well, I'm gonna beat you up because the county passed a law and you can't park your RV on your 400 acres in front of your house.
So we made some changes to that to clarify. The intent of that is that if you own a parcel of property, you can't put like an RV out and rent it out as a second residence. You can't permanently live in a structure like that if it's not, you know, if there's already a house. In other words, you can't get around our rules by using an RV to do so. That makes sense.
Well, that's what concerns me, and I think those rules are too restrictive. You know, if you think about that, and the neighbor doesn't like you and wants to challenge you and wants to fight you, you put the power in that person's hand, even though they own the 400 acres all the way around them, and they can still come and challenge you and say, you can't park your RV there.
It wasn't about just parking.
Pardon me?
It wasn't just that you were parking a vehicle there.
It's living.
It was that you can't use
Well,
it
even
as
if
a
they were
residence.
living in it while they remodel their house.
Well, that was something that we said you can look here and see what Director added. It says the boat, trailer, or recreational vehicle
Yeah, that
is
was
not
it.
used for living purposes. However, The owner may temporarily reside in a trailer or recreational vehicle while actively contracting of his or her primary residence on the property as permitted by any existing restrictive covenants. You can't get around restrictive covenants. The amount of time that he or she may temporarily reside in the trailer or recreational vehicle shall be reasonable as determined by the administrative officer. So, I mean, there are caveats. It's to try to keep people from getting around our single-family residential use.
Yep.
And you're right. We can change that. If you feel like that's too restrictive, then let us know how you want it worded. We'll look to get it changed.
What I'm saying, anything that we write, someone can take and use it to beat someone else up.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. That's why you have an ordinance in front of you that you could easily pass on to quorum court tonight that just repeal all of it. Then everybody gets to do whatever they want to. That's what this one does. I passed it out. I mean, it would just undo all of the zoning. There would be no zoning in Washington County. And it would just basically say people can use their property however they want to.
Well, I keep my job, Ryan.
You know, and I think that's something that we miss is you guys will own this. This will be a living map. It'll be a living process.
Yes.
I think at the risk of, it won't be perfect. And I think over the years we'll have to tweak it. And I think this is a great example. We can see, you know, I mean, we can see the needle we're trying to thread here. But if we have issues in the future, you guys can definitely come in and use your expertise to help us perfect it.
Agreed.
Yeah, I need just like to mention one more thing. I know everyone is tired and needs to go home, but like to answer the question from like last time, JP Pond requested about like the runoff. So I asked one of the civil engineers today, like that we deal with all the time. So what is like the exact definition of a runoff? And she said actually, they do the coefficient for the grading. Let's say like we have a flat land and now this is how it looks like. It's all like sodded or like it's all like grass or gravel. So they do the calculation on it. If you're gonna build a house here and this corner is gonna be impervious. So they do the coefficient for post and pre development and they do the analysis and they see what's the coefficient for previous and now or like post if you're gonna build. If this post is more, the coefficient is higher by, I guess, like 1 point something to 2. So it's like higher. You have to adjust the grading or you build a detention pond that can absorb that like increase. And that detention pond is not just like for that like water that's going to run off. They also like add in consideration the 100-year like flood, in case if there is any flood. And those like, this information you can like get from like the FEMA website. They will tell you what is the height and the low of that like creek, and you will have like a VU shape, and you will have like cross section. And actually, I have this like on our map. I don't want to complicate it, but an example like will be found in that staff report that like we did for the subdivision. They had like multiple like ditches, and each ditch of them was analyzed for the 5-year, 15-year, 15, like 5, 10, 15, 25, and 50 and the 100-year like flood. And it shows you how much it's increased. And based on all those calculations, that pond, detention pond, was designed to like withhold like maybe double the amount of water. So it's once again, they go to engineering school like for 5 years and they do training for like at least 3 to 4 years for a reason. Yeah, so it's all like numbers. Same as the bridges. Each time you cross a bridge, like I guess you pray that the engineer like who built that like knows math, so you can make it both ways, so at least.
Justice Taylor?
Thank you, Judge. Real quick, Sam, the node map, the concept of that, you may not have an answer to this, but it was something I thought about when we were looking at it. Do we know under this scenario how many parcels would be included in the commercial?
I did not do the
Oh,
intersection, but I can. The only reason we had this is just like to show you, hey, we can start from here and grow, or like we can just like confine everything to like one like mile or like more. So that's just like for visual. But yeah, I can, if this is gonna help, but I don't think it's gonna help much, I can always convert this into like a shapefile and do intersection and tell you how much.
No, I just was curious, the
Yeah.
different impacts
Yeah.
between the two.
Yeah, once again, it's up to you guys. If you don't see that, like this area, for instance, requires that much of a zoning designation, we can always like eliminate that.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and one more thing also, like you can look at the, sorry to interrupt,
No,
but
go
if you
ahead.
can go to the website, the web map again, either one of them, the zoning or the other one, if you go to the layers here, there is subdivision layer here, so you can like zoom into it and see what's next, what not next to like a zoning area. So that's also like a good idea for you to make a decision.
Okay. A couple really small things. I saw a typo in here, and then also a couple of contractions.
Oh, that's been done. Wouldn't or something,
Yeah,
yeah, I removed
there's just
that.
two of them I was able to find, and I saw.
Oh, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're gone on the new one, oh, yeah. So which one is the typo, just like let me know.
There's missing an S, so in section 2, paragraph F is in Frank. After the word meeting, I think there should be an S. Not to exceed 4 meetings, plural, but it's missing that S.
Yeah, I'll fix it.
And then there's doesn't and wouldn't in section 1A84.
Text me.
Okay, thank you.
Justice Simons?
Thank you, Chair. So in my short tenure on the court, I think I've had more lawsuits concerning CUPs than I've had meetings, it seems like. So I've always expressed my concern with the existing structure. And I've always made it clear that for me, personally, I have to have a pretty compelling reason to go against the Planning and Zoning Board's recommendation when a CUP comes before us. And there's been times that I feel like we've met that level and disagreed with planning and zoning. But I'm not an engineer. I don't have the technical expertise, and I've seen time and time again, we disregard that expertise and make a decision here on this body that's based off of emotion or pleas of the neighborhood, and that puts us in a hard spot, puts us in a legal spot. So I'm excited to see this flow chart kind of changing, not so much the process, but the order in which body sees what first. However, changing this up does put a lot back on our planning and zoning. And one area of concern that I've had in the past is we'll get a CUP and it's been pushed through planning and zoning because of a lack of participation in the meeting. Hey, we only had 4 out of the 7 members there, and nobody really saw anything, but by the time the appeal gets to us, well, hey, all of a sudden, it's a much bigger deal than it seemed like going through planning and zoning. So my concern, or I guess my question is, and this might just fall squarely on your shoulders, Judge, but how do we encourage participation for the zoning and planning staff to show up to meetings? Like, your job is gonna be much more important if this passes. How do we ensure that those individuals have the qualifications and the competencies to do the job that we're requiring? I mean, are we gonna be changing the job duties and the requirements to fill those positions? Because there's at least one individual that I've talked to that used to sit on that board, and he's like, man, it was hard enough to get people to show up to the meeting who were appointed to sit there. It's not a lucrative thing. It doesn't pay. And so it's hard to get those people to show up and do their job that they were appointed to do, much less do it in a way that is going to keep the county out of hot water. So that might squarely fall on your shoulders, but.
I guess I would respond to that with my opinion is that if we change this process to something what we're looking at now, that makes that board a lot more consequential. And I think people will understand that moving forward. Yes, I think you're right. We can't hardly beg people to be part of our planning board right now, because I think this process, like Counselor noted earlier, right, wrong, or indifferent, a lot of times gets off the tracks. So, I mean, I think my opinion would be that if we got a process like this, which, by the way, is much more close to and conducive to what the municipalities are doing. I think people will understand it more. I'm talking about neighbors, applicants, and I believe people who would want to be willing to to serve on the planning board would understand this process a lot more. It's very heartbreaking. I hope you guys understand, for somebody to go all the way through that process and be denied on the very back end. It's very disheartening. It's disheartening for the people who've been part of that process along its way, if you will. So I don't know if I did a great job at answering that, but I did about as good as I could. Justice Ricker?
Yes, sir. I'd like to see if we can get a copy of the latest and greatest copy of this ordinance emailed out to us, just so that we can, I understand it is a working document and changes day to day, but I'd like to be caught up on it a little bit more. And what's the process? How do you want us to go about changing the map? Because like we were talking about the dreaded wedding venue, I voted against one because of the traffic and the access down a bad dirt road. Well, we've got a whole lot of property that borders interstate, has no access or less access than a one-lane county road. Probably shouldn't be zoned commercial.
Sure.
So how do we go about modifying all this so that we get to a map that we can all
Couple things.
agree or work
I think counselor and counselor and director are, I think, finished with their updates in terms of we should be able to mail what is like a final draft out to you guys
Within the week.
within
yeah.
the week.
And we can all,
Yeah.
we can all, I know these are gonna be big files, so we can always put them on jump drives, and next week at your meeting, give them to you. My thought in asking your question would be, look, here's the things you need to think about. If you're wanting to look at the nodes, and you're wanting to look to go out from those, you've got to say, you've got to have a point, half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, something like that, if you're going to go with that. If there are certain highways that you don't feel like should be part of that, then have that written out too. Hey, I think we should take Highway 16 off here because of X. You get to own every bit of this. You need to, whatever it is that you're wanting to do, make sure that you have a good identifiable reason for wanting to do that. And I think that that in getting you this plan and you having time to look at those and come back to a meeting and say, okay, here's what and we can all go through it and we'll just have to vote on what people like and have that discussion. I do want to point a couple of things out to you that are worth mentioning. I've said it before, but I want you to key in. You're going to look through this zoning. It talks about the official map. You have to approve the map. County judge has to certify it. County clerk has to attest to it, just like an ordinance. So don't read too much into that of, well, the county judge gets to pick the map. That's not what happens. It even talks about nobody can change that map except for the quorum court. That's a violation if you do. The enforcement mechanism in this new one. I have a case right now against an attorney who is a former member of this quorum court, who was actually a member at the time that the ordinance was passed, that says, and is still in effect today, if you file an appeal, the county can no longer enforce a fine against you each day that you're in violation. It is true. It exists. I'll be happy to give that to you all as well. Mm-hmm. We've taken that out. This says we can fine someone $1,000 a day, because that's the maximum that the state law will allow us for a violation, and it authorizes the sheriff's office to issue those citations. It gives the county more teeth. And it doesn't say if you file an appeal, that stops. That doesn't keep someone from asking a court to stay the fine, but we're not giving it to them for free, okay? There's a reason for that, because you can delay these things for a long time in court and there's no fines, all right? That's something to look at. You'll go through here, you'll notice the zoning board of adjustment, its two functions are to hear appeals from the zoning official. In other words, if I go and I say, hey, Sam, I want to build this right here, it's commercial, and Sam says, no, it's not commercial, you're going to have to get it rezoned, and I don't like that, I can appeal that to the zoning board, and then they can look at it, make a decision. The other thing is variances. That's what they'll hear is variances. So they won't hear the initial zoning request, but they'll hear those two types of things.
Yeah, that's mentioned on our website if you want to read it.
There's a lot of provisions, just non-conforming uses, kind of what those are, how we handle those. Look at that, see if you have any questions. The district regulations kind of talk about the minimum requirements, the setbacks, how small, it's pretty standard with what we have. We haven't changed any of that. So what you'll see is pretty much what we operate with now, but by all means, read through that, make sure you don't have any questions about that. You will get the new updated table. I've already seen a typo, Coleman, that we'll make sure we get changed on that. That'll kind of give you through that. If you have questions or you think of things that aren't on there that we may need to add, please make note of that. Let's talk about that. Let's get those things on here. And then it talks about the procedures that you'll go through if you want to start a project from start to finish, zoning and then planning board, and kind of how that works out. Let's see. There's a lot of details that were put in here that the technical people understand as far as, the footage of road for certain things. I'm not, that's
Turn
Sam's
and
wheelhouse,
radius
not
and all of
mine.
this, yeah.
If you have questions, highlight it. Let's talk to Sam because he's the expert. He can tell you all that. And then that's pretty much it. Then we get into the flood prevention, which is an ordinance y'all have already passed. We get into cell towers and all that stuff. But those are the things that haven't really changed with what we're doing. This zoning section is. Make sure you understand that. And if you don't, please let us know and ask questions so that we can clear up any confusion. And if you have suggestions or there are things you don't like, let's talk about that. Let's get to that so that we can try to get everything out there and see what it is that we've got left. That would be my suggestion, is to come with how you would do those maps. And then you all can sit and talk about it and vote on it. Okay?
Yeah, just let me add one more thing, Brian, and Judge, if you allow me. This is an interactive map. So that's one of the things. That's not the one that's going to be filed each year. That's the whole idea, was once we produce something, it might change across over the year. So by the end of the year, we're going to come to you. So it's that's the new active map that we have right now. We need to file it again. Whatever I do, let's say streets has changed. They added streets. They added parcels. It's been split. That's all interactive. That is a service that it's tied to our database. Once the database change, I can show you this like right now on the spot. Once something changes there, you just refresh the map, it just changes it. Streets, parcels, any layer over here will change, including right now we have CUPs that been approved. Once they're ratified, I will go and manually add them to what it says here, where it says CUP. I add all of this new stuff here for that reason. It's just interactive because we don't want this to be stagnant for about a year. And then I will forget what was approved, what not. Let's say a year from now, our database crashed and there is no access to what's been approved, what not. That's going to be hard. But everything you see here, every layer over here you see, it's very interactive, and anything we change on that database reflects automatically within few seconds. Once you refresh, it just shows up here. And thanks for the typos.
I really appreciate the discussion tonight. I think it was robust. I appreciate the questions. There's nothing here in this process we're trying to hide, and we welcome the opportunity to answer you guys' questions. We do have an item on this agenda. I'd entertain a motion to postpone this 30 days to keep working on it within the county committee. I have that motion made by Justice Lyons, second by Justice Dean. All those in favor? Those opposed? Item number 8 will move to the next County Services Committee. Next up is the last item on our agenda, and item number 9 is public comment. We have a 12-minute public comment period with a limit of 3 minutes per individual. Public comments this evening.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just spread this out anyway. Sherry Main, 15451 Riches Road, Fayetteville. This was a very interesting meeting tonight. What I find interesting is we're talking about this, but we can't compare. I'm looking at what was posted with the agenda, which is not what you're talking about tonight. So I've been trying to make notes all night about what you've been talking about to stay on the same page. But in general, I do have a few questions I'd like for you all to consider to put into changes. Under 1 General A 31, Development, it says the act of changing the state of a tract of land after its function has been purposefully changed by man, including alterations to the land. It references that quite a bit in this new zoning ordinance. And 1 General A 54 says land development. Developments, including LSDs, the term land development shall, which it says in the definition, shall is a mandatory, include activities to prepare land for development, including activities such as grading and clearing. However, development shall not include agricultural activities. Some of this needs to be tightened up. That's why we're in a position now where we have such a gray area. In general, A3, agricultural uses needs to be clear of agri use as current use, not the intended use. This is subjective and has a gray area that can be abused by the applicant. Example, building pads for single-purpose agri use would be the intent of clearing the land at current is that you're going to put broiler houses, layer houses, turkey houses, greenhouses. That is your plan in the land development, is to make a pad and build those, not clear all the material off of the land over 5 years and then say it's agri. That is, the intent should not be taken there because it's too subjective. Anybody can say they're going to do anything when they're done, and that gets into another area, but I won't have time to say all of what I'm saying, but I'm going to send all my notes to Attorney Lester and Director Ada, because I think these are good things that need to be looked at. I'm not opposed to this. We need change. We need change for the better, but we need to make it as good as it can get in the beginning. We don't need to start making all these amendments. We're going to have the same mess we had before. So we need to make it as good and as clear as we can get it, tighten up the loopholes, clean up the gray areas, make things more precise, and we need to really address that agricultural issue. And on the zoning map, 300 foot from the center line on either side of a major corridor. On Highway 16 West,
Ms. Main,
it
your
has
time's
several large
expired.
parcels. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comments.
The red button? Or it's on, sorry. Hi. So I'm Ashley Hicks. I live outside of Elkins, and my husband and I own 53 acres. We raise cattle, layer hens, and 4 kids out there. So this zoning ordinance will affect families of Washington County for generations to come, and I feel that there needs to be more done to get the public involved so that people that are going to be affected by this have a say in what's going on. If I were JP, I'd be holding town halls in my district so that people can come out and give their 2 cents. Since the planning board special meeting a few weeks ago, I've really been ringing the alarm bells with my neighbors about this. I've published an op-ed in the state paper, I've been on the news, been lighting Facebook up, and I've been calling folks, and everybody that I talk to doesn't want it as it stands. So a lot of folks that live in these rural areas, we look at that map and we all have the same question, and it's where's the water gonna come from? So thankfully my family's on Mount Olive water, but we do have a well that we use for our livestock, and right now as it is, it already runs dry in the summer. So with that concern in mind, if I were a JP, I propose an amendment with a provision that incentivizes water preservation. I'd like to see a county property tax credit for residents that take the time and money to build rainwater catchment systems, invest in cisterns for water storage, or that dig deeper or additional wells. Washington County is growing and something does need to be done. I'd also like to see more from my county officials to bounce the ball back to those municipal leaders and tell them to get their housing crisis situation in order. Yeah. And last, I don't believe that the applicants seeking the zoning change should be the ones to notify the public My concern being that these notifications will get mistaken for junk mail, and I expect the government to notify me of a government meeting. With how creative advertisers are nowadays to get you to look at their ads, it's not far-fetched to think that you're getting a letter that looks official, just so that you open it up and they can try to sell you something. So I see potential for people to miss out on their right to exercise their rights before this body. So I do appreciate the work that county planners have done. I'm happy with the node map that's been created, and I'm very thankful for the robust discussion that's happened here tonight. It's very obvious that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and I hope you take some of those ideas into consideration. Thanks.
Thank you.
Happy
Public
birthday.
comment.
Good evening. I'm Lloyd Keck. I live in South Central Washington County, County Road 216. They call that Bug Scuffle Road. Family's been there 5 generations, I guess, on the mountain out there. I don't know if that matters versus a few years, but that's the case with my family. I'm not categorically opposed to this or zoning or planning, but I think it needs some modifications, and you've talked about some of those things tonight. You know, in terms of arbitrary, capricious, maybe you should look at extending out 5 miles from some of these municipal areas. I mean, we could all agree, you know, 412 and certain corridors are busier than others. You might even look at traffic counts, and you know, that would be a very finite parameter in terms of determining where some of these corridors should be. To back up, and probably too late on this, I think the quorum court, I would like them to have some listening sessions when these big items come up. I know you can't do that on everything, but go to the fire stations and the community centers and actually offer a chance for the public, I think, to be, to make comment, maybe be more informed with that. Something this big maybe does need an outside study or consultant. I know you put a lot of hard work into it, you have expertise here, but you know, a study about some of these issues, are they legal? How do they impact certain things? Might be something for you to think about. I'm not sure you know, we could go on and on about exemptions, but you know, in Carroll County, they're building a windmill wind farm. You know, that probably doesn't need to go along a corridor where you've got state highways. That probably does need to be located somewhere in a rural area, a large plot of land. But then again, I kind of like looking at the trees and the sunset from my porch, so I don't know that I want to look at it across the valley. So I don't know if, and might have been addressed, but you know, there's a lot of contingencies there that I think you need to make. You know, try to take some of those in consideration, and then also make sure that if people, you know, are denied, that there is plenty of recourse to be heard or to appeal a decision by planning or the quorum court or even the county judge if the final decision rests there. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Public comments.
Gladys Tiffany, Fayetteville. There's a couple of things on my mind. One of them is that I was hearing a lot of good discussion about how how businesses could function in the new system. And I'm really concerned that there's not enough discussion about how we're going to protect the environmental parts of the county, because I mean, every person here loves this county and the land that we live on, and our hills and our trees are very, very important to us. And these streams that that created this land really are important as far as water sources and agriculture as part of all of it. And a little bit more discussion about how those things get cared for as we are beginning to urbanize. If that's what has to happen, that land has to be cared for, as well as the rights of the people that are going to be using that land. The second thing is, I really was impressed by the previous speaker who emphasized just how big this issue is for our county, because it is. This is a very important issue for everybody here, whether they're in the rural areas or those urban areas. And I think taking into consideration that the people need to understand what you're doing as you're getting ready to do it, because if people know and understand what you're about, there's going to be so much less resistance and so much less anxiety as they are getting ready to see it go into effect. And without an understanding, people are going to be you're going to find a lot more resistance if there's not some good discussion of it in the public eye and some good articles by the people here who are writing to their own constituents. It's very important that y'all are communicating what you see in this, so I hope you'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. We've got about a minute left. What's the entertainment here? I have a motion to
You said you had all night at the beginning of this, Judge, with all due respect.
we're trying to take care of this. Another outburst, and we'll invite you to spend your time somewhere else. I have a motion to suspend the rules and add 15 minutes to public comment by Justice Pond. I heard a second by Justice Dean. All those in favor? Those opposed? We'll continue on 15 minutes.
You have to excuse me. I'm probably pretty nervous. I don't public speak. I'm just.
You're fine. Just state your name and where you're from for the record. And
I'm Beth Pratt, and I live out in Strickler. And when I first saw the first map several weeks ago at the last meeting, it scared the heck out of me. I come out of Fayetteville and I go home and it relaxes me because I'm going through my country roads, I'm looking at my mountains, and having the thought of having all this commercial on my way home, because I go right down 265, all the way home towards Devil's Den, towards St. Francis Ozark Park, and having all these commercial opportunities out there for the people who use those facilities scares me. I like your idea now of the nodes, and I encourage the JPs to look at that more. Start small, expand out from there. Let us get comfortable. We're rural, and we want to stay that way. And I thank you for your time.
thank you, ma'am. Public comments.
First of all, apologies for the outburst. I am very new to this. As you can tell, I'm probably one of the younger folks here.
I just want to say we love to hear from you. So, I mean, there's no confrontational.
No, I
stance.
appreciate it. I did not know the formal process. My name is Esther DeLuise. I'm a North Texas transplant. I watched North Texas change dramatically from the time I moved in to when expansions were approved for initial commercial designation. While it may not impact an existing property owner like myself who settled on AR 170 on a beautiful mountainside, absolutely beautiful area that personally I feel has healed me from the cranes and the construction and the concrete of North Texas. I find myself at peace, like she was describing, as you drive home. You feel at peace. You look at your view, you feel at peace. You breathe the air, you don't hear noise, you hear the birds. It's absolutely healing, and I think that we need to protect that. On the drive here, that song, Where Do the Children Play by Cat Stevens played, and I was like, I find myself always moved by music, and I heard that song, and I was like, very fitting considering I'm coming to this hearing for the first time, not knowing what to expect, obviously very new to the process. I'm on 170, very close to Devil's Den State Park. Those roads should absolutely not be designated for commercial use. I think there's plenty of other areas that can be expanded, potentially where existing city limits are, build out of that radius initially, not necessarily just arbitrarily saying major thoroughways and highways, as you mentioned before. I'm on one of those. I don't want to see a commercial property come up, and while that may not be a concern for existing landowners, once it is established as commercial, that's when the offers come in. Money talks. Money will sway children, property owners, people who inherit the property. It talks, and I watched it talk the talk to North Texas all the way out to practically the Oklahoma border. My ask is that you guys very seriously consider maybe dimming down that map. That map is terrifying to look at. I absolutely share in that sentiment. Terrifying to look at. I just invested, I'm a new mom of a 2-year-old daughter. My husband and I decided to put everything that we'd been saving into a few acres that we can call our own on 170. So I'm absolutely on that area. I do not want to see any type of commercial development there. And if anything, strip off the roads that lead to the state park. There's no business with commercial there. And please consider maybe zoning. I agree with the nodes, maybe exploring that option a little bit more, or exploring going outside of existing city limits, not necessarily just saying the highways. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, ma'am. Public comments.
Hi, excuse me. Sarah Moore from Fayetteville. I'm the executive director of the Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition, and so I'm going to change gears. We've been talking about zoning for a while, but we also talked about the jail earlier tonight. We continue to have conversations over, the past 5 years about the over-incarceration at the jail, and I wanted to come tonight and talk to you about we have options and we have alternatives to continuing to arrest and incarcerate, and we have available funds and avenues today. One of the biggest things, though, I wanted to let you know, if you haven't looked at the latest Arkansas Crime Information Systems information for 2023, crime charges in Washington County were actually down 8% versus 2022. They're actually down 23% since COVID, when we had a spike of incidences that were happening due to the pandemic. And so despite the fact that our population has been increasing in Washington County over the last 10 years, we're actually the safest that we've ever been. However, we continue to struggle with continuing to have a jail that has folks sleeping on the floor. And so I want to applaud that there had been efforts over time, and there are things like when the National Center for State Courts assessment was done, for a time we had the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. But unfortunately, that's gone away. It's actually been 350 days since it's met. Whenever that was in place, that's where we had the incubation and what we're about to implement of the mental health court, which is close to launching in Washington County. That's a very needed resource that also has the ability to look at other alternatives. The National Center for State Courts, that was taxpayer-funded assessment in Washington County, also called for robust pretrial services. For an investment of $500,000 to $600,000 a year, we have the ability to have a handful of employees that are able to really wrap around individuals in our community to meet the needs of their of resources that they need in the community, while safely releasing them back to be with their families, to be back at work, and could have a couple hundred folks come out of the facility today. That would leave beds available. We currently have ordinances in place that have ARPA money set aside for a little over $18 million. You have a last quarter of 2024 before those monies actually have to be formally allocated. You have the ability to repeal the current ordinances and to put in place ordinances that use this money in an eligible manner for things like pretrial services, for things like the crisis stabilization unit that's been closed, that's a needed mental health resource, for things like the ACC unit. $18 million has the ability to do something like create housing in that area, treatment and recovery services. And so I hope that as this body looks at their plans for 2025 budget and really considers the types of investments that can be made, that you'll consider this.
Public comments.
Thank you.
Judge Deakins, my name is Jerry Jens. Can I address the JPs?
You have to address the chair.
Address the chair, okay. So for the JP of the 13th District, my name is Jerry Jens, G-E-N-Z. Please write down my name so that we can have some contact. Oh, I think it's on, is it not?
You need to get closer to the microphone itself. Yeah, thank you.
Apologize, I'm sorry. I've been told I speak stupidly loud, so I apologize. Another JP I've learned more information from than the JP that represents my district. So I thank that person through a mutual friend that has shared information. I think there's a ton of work needs to be done, and I understand why the JPs as a whole probably haven't done that, because I'm just finding out after being involved in this for a few meetings that the JPs don't really understand what's going on. So this thing it needs to be drawn out, proactive, extended, thought through. Is it legal? Is it not? There are great questions that are coming up. But to have this thing rush through committee, shoved down the taxpayer's throat, and when I say that, in order for people to have a good dialogue, right, sir? If you and I are going to have a good dialogue, we need to work off the same context. So the context that I have, and it just might be my own, is that everyone that sits in front of me is a public servant. You're here through the grace and the privilege of the taxpayers and the voters that expect you to most likely rule with the majority, but have some compassion and empathy for the minority. And then you get to balance that decision-making power that we give you to try to figure out what's best. This over-encompassing policy that you don't understand any better than the public does doesn't need to go any further until it's been gone over and gone over and gone over. Town halls, group meetings, public outreach, fire stations. You and I need to get to know one another. With 118 people that I've talked to.
I think you're supposed to address the chair.
Sorry.
Reminder.
That's okay. Sorry, I'm passionate, right? So the 118 people in the 13th district that I personally talked to that knew nothing about this, and they're very educated, open and upfront community members, and they're like, they knew something from I'm on it, I'm at the meetings, to I heard a blurb about it. And I can count those people on 2 hands.
Thank you, sir. Your
Thank
time's
you.
expired. Public comments.
Remember my name.
Evening. My name's Joe Tor. I'm a West Fork resident. Thank you for doing this and extending the time. I've been a former city alderman and lived through one of the wedding venue debacles. I do have a question. I've been listening to the meeting, and I'm reading the ordinance right now, step 1 zoning action, and through it. And I think one of the points of confusion, maybe a lot of people, certainly I'm hung up on, is the developer's going to send out a notice. But it was said, I think rightfully so, that at some point the public's going to be allowed back in and be able, after they get the notice, to come in front of the board. And if they've got any problems with conformity use or something that's being changed, be able to voice their concerns and have an impact on the process later. But that's not really how the ordinance is written. I'm a licensed general contractor and professional builder, and I understand what I'm reading, but it seems like there's going to be support for the developer to work with the county and the administrative officer. And if it moves forward, it'll go to a hearing for approval, back to the board for approval. To clarify, is that when the public is going to be able to raise their hand and say, hey, we've got an issue with this, we'd like a second consideration? Because it seems like a lot of people think it's going to be done, one and done at that point. What are your thoughts on that?
I forgot your name, sir.
Joe Tor.
You're just here to comment to us.
I
Due to
am.
the
I'm
rules of the
just
meeting.
asking a question.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
absolutely. Well, before you leave, will you make sure Director Ada has your contact info so that we can answer this question?
Sure.
But this is just a time for you to
No
address
problem.
us. Yep.
Well, then my observation is, I live in a development corridor. Washington County Rural Water has got about 15 gaps in service. Some of the corridors that you have are areas that aren't serviced by 12-inch or 24-inch water lines. I live in a gap area. I'm not covered by Washington County Rural Water. I'm not covered by West Fork. And I get development. I like it. We all make money doing it. But infrastructure has to be provided. And when a site plan is in front of you, a lot of times I see engineers just say off-site water, and it's tabled and it goes forward. That's one of the concerns I have doing this and turning them loose. I think some people have probably lived through that. And that's it. I really do appreciate you extending the time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate everybody here tonight. It's great to see our colleagues, great to see the public. We're adjourned.